Criminalizing sex work doesn't stop sex work. Same with criminalizing drug use or abortion. What it does do is create an unsafe and punitive climate for people who are already incredibly vulnerable. That's the reason why in 2004, a special court, the first of its kind, was opened in Queens. On a typical day, the Human Trafficking Intervention Court sees scores of women who have been arrested for selling sex and are victims of trafficking. Their approach, to not view defendants as criminals or degenerates, but rather as people in need of support services, is revolutionary, and Stephanie Wang-Breal has been documenting its approach for the past 3.5 years. Her film, Blowin Up, is in theaters now. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
How did you find the story?
So I learned about this courtroom through an article that I read in the New York Times in 2014. And when I read about the population of women that this court serves and that this court was being led by a Japanese female judge, my interests were immediately piqued. And so my producer and I hopped on the F train and we took the train to Queens and we observed the court in action.
There was a case recently, I guess in the last 2 years, that made headlines. The New York Times did a big feature on it about a woman named Song Yang, I believe her name was,
Yes.
Who committed suicide when she was being arrested again by undercover police officers. And she had gone through this court, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
I feel like that was the first time that a lot of people had heard about this court. Can you tell me a little bit about the work that it does and why women like Song Yang are channeled into this court?
Yes, so this court, as you had mentioned in the opening, is the first of its kind in our nation, and it's trying to change the way that women are prosecuted who've been arrested for prostitution charges. And prostitution charges run the gamut. It can be, a lot of the women are being arrested for loitering, for massage parlor raids, and so a woman like Song Yang, who, the Case of Jane Doe article from the New York Times, she was one of the women who was arrested in the massage parlor raids. And this courtroom, in fact, serves two populations of women. One, domestic, Black, Latina, transgender youth. And then the other half of the courtroom is mainly undocumented Asian women who are being arrested in these massage parlor raids. As Judge Shrita once said, it didn't make in the film, but she has said to us over and over again, you don't see white, highly paid escort workers ever coming into this courtroom. It's always women of color who are, more vulnerable to police raids.
Judge Shrita also says in the film that it can be hard to determine whether or not someone is being trafficked, and that trafficking isn't as white and black as somebody saying, he's telling me I better have sex with this John or he's going to kill me. Talk to me a little bit about some of the nuances that you saw while you were filming in this court.
Yeah, I learned so much while making this film about the sex worker spectrum and how vast and different it is across, races, backgrounds, ethnicities. And I love that moment in the film when Judge Shrita talks about coercion and that there are different forms of coercion that we don't understand. And that also people mostly think that trafficking requires someone being taken across borders. For someone to be labeled a victim of trafficking, when often for the domestic girls, they are possibly being trafficked in their own street corner in Brooklyn.
You brought such nuance to it. And, one of the things that Judge Shrita says is, there may be a case where a woman is told, you can't stop. Maybe you got into this, quote unquote, somewhat willingly, because you heard that you were making money, but you can't stop because otherwise we're going to tell everyone in your village back in China what you're doing. And that clearly is a case of coercion, but that other courts may not recognize it as such. And so her court has this really amazing 360 view of it. And tell me a little bit about how cases are dealt with in her court as opposed to in a normal criminal court.
So Judge Shrita's courtroom, it's a problem-solving courtroom. It comes from the drug treatment. It has antecedents from the drug treatment courtroom where instead of just convicting someone for this charge, they're offering them access to programs, culturally appropriate programs, where they are doing either counseling sessions, and those counseling sessions are like not typical counseling sessions either, what you would expect. So that these women and girls can decide through this work with other people whether or not they're in the life, how they feel about that, and whether or not they want to choose to get out of the life, that they can help them however they can with resources to do that. Once the woman finishes the courses, then her case is dismissed and sealed so that in the future, if she ever does choose to go out of the life and try to get another job, this conviction will not show up on her record, harming her opportunities for the future. So a typical criminal court that's not having this kind of courtroom in its building, they are just charging these women with felonies or convictions. And so that is hindering them from moving forward with their lives if they do choose to do anything else.
And one of the women who went through this court and completed the court-mandated sessions was a woman named Candy, and we actually have a clip from the film for her right now.
I lived in hotels, traveling from place to place. I was in hotels every day, every single day, for like 6 months straight. And then I had to run away. It wasn't, it's called blowing up when you leave a pimp. So I blew up and I went home. It's hard to do it on your own because when I did try to do it on my own, I got my room ran in. I got gun put in my face multiple times. I've gotten robbed. I've gotten stabbed. It's a lot of, that comes with a lot. Doing it by yourself, like that's like the only benefit to having a pimp is the fact that you have protection, you know? It's just crazy.
How did you approach talking to these women, many of whom were extremely vulnerable, some of whom were undocumented, and telling them, hey, is it okay if I film you, and are you comfortable sharing your story?
Yeah, so the women in the film were the only women who wanted to do this. There were so many women who did not want to participate in the filming. And, you know, when people learned that we got access to film in the courtroom, they assumed that we got carte blanche to film everything that we wanted from there. But every single scene after the courtroom was another conversation, another negotiation, another long discussion that took sometimes 3 weeks, sometimes 4 months. And so in those conversations with the women, I would learn from them their story, but also learn from them what they were comfortable with, what they wanted to share, how they felt comfortable filming, what were the creative barriers around getting them to collaborate and be involved in this project. And so based on those discussions, I created different framings and ways of telling their stories so that they would feel comfortable to share.
The trust between your camera and the subject is so evident because many of these women do share in depth. And another thing that really comes across is the vibe in the courtroom is amazingly unmoralizing, right? Like there's a scene where one of the women who works for one of the service providers is talking to a woman who just has had her case cleared. And, you know, she's talking to her about like, you know, what's next for you? Are you going to go back into the life? Are you still in the life? And the woman hedges. And the service provider says, you know that there's no judgment from me about whether you're doing what you're doing or not. I just want to make sure that you're not getting arrested and that the rest of your life isn't going to be ruined. I'm curious about the fragility that emerges about this court towards the end as that woman in question moves away and another woman, a DA, passes away. You get the sense that this court exists because there are some good eggs. Was that a sense that you got, or is the court bigger than this handful of women who you follow over the course of the documentary?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that this court, I mean, we observed other courts in action, and one thing that we loved about the Queen's courtroom in particular was the larger-than-life personalities of each of the stakeholders who represented the courtroom, not just Judge Sarita, but like you said, Eliza Hook, the GEMS counselor, Kim Affronti, the prosecutor, even the court officers had larger-than-life personalities. But I also loved it because they all taught me as a filmmaker that we all have our own dilemmas coming into this space. And even though our dilemmas and our moral values might be different, we're all here together to do the best that we can in the roles that we're in to help these women, whatever that means.
What were some of your own assumptions that you found challenged?
I mean, I think that, you know, like most women and girls, we believe that, you know, sex work is something that you have no agency in and you have no choice. And, I mean, that's completely incorrect assumption.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask about your own background? What is your ethnic background, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, no problem. I'm a Chinese American.
Mm-hmm.
My parents are both from China, and they immigrated to this country in 1977, the year I was born.
Mm-hmm.
So I grew up in Ohio.
I'm curious about what it was like for you filming with a lot of these women who had been busted by vice squads in massage parlor raids.
Yeah, so luckily I speak Mandarin,
Mm-hmm.
and so we could communicate on a very personal level about life and life choices. And, it was so great to hear from them about the things that they wanted. It's pretty simple things that most women want. And, hearing that from them was just really amazing. And, I just feel very privileged and lucky that I'm in a position that I can, listen to these women, be invited into their lives, and to tell their stories.
That was that facet of the story struck me as well. And my mom is Chinese, and sort of seeing like a chain of sisterhood that a lot of the translators or service providers who were there advocating for these women appeared to me to be American-born Chinese who were using their language skills and their social skills to help these women who were being trafficked navigate this very confusing court system, which also could result in deportation, especially post-Trump. The last chapter of the film seems to deal with the aftermath of the election of Donald Trump, which was a curveball for all of us, but I imagine for your film as well. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the additional challenges that people now have to deal with in a post-Trump world?
So for this courtroom in particular, one of the incentives that the counselors and service providers could offer these women was access to a T visa, which is a trafficking visa, or a U visa, which is a domestic violence visa, if they came forward and to share their story to help hire federal investigators launch a campaign into who is being trafficked and who their traffickers are. But under the current administration, supposedly these T visas are being scrutinized, and fewer are being offered. So there's that aspect of just, it's harder for the service providers to get women to participate or to want to participate when they have so little to offer them. And then on another aspect, ICE is present in the courts. Judge Sarita says they're not present in the APA court as much, but just because they're not present in the courtroom doesn't mean that they're not waiting outside of the courthouse for the cases to be dismissed.
Yeah, there's an amazing scene where Judge Sarita assembles this little ecosystem of prosecutors, of service providers, and they're talking about the fact that someone was recently arrested and deported by ICE outside of the court. And Judge Sarita, you can see, has no choice but to say, I can't make any guarantees for the safety of your undocumented clients. Of course, we want them to show up for their court appointments, but I can't tell you that that's safe anymore. It really felt like it called the whole efficacy of the court into question.
And she gets so upset watching that scene because it just reminds her of just how hard their work is. And no matter how hard they try to do the best they can, and that they all try to put these measures in place of trauma, understanding that there's other forces at work that they cannot control. It's hard.
And she herself is such an extraordinary character. I mean, I know that it's like a bit taboo in documentary film to say that somebody's a born star, but like she's a born star. Every time she's on camera, you're just drawn to her. And her background is amazing too. Her parents are Japanese artists, and they sort of subvert your traditional
Radical
ideals.
artists.
Yeah, normally you think about, like Asian parents as being like, yes, I would love for my child to be a lawyer. And there's a scene where her mom's like, I didn't imagine that you'd turn out like this. And she's like what? And her mom's like, a lawyer.
Yeah, no, it was so great. Her mother is hilarious, an amazing woman as well.
What is the current state of the attempt to decriminalize prostitution in New York City?
So there's currently a movement, a decrim movement that's happening in New York State right now, in New York City in particular. I think that it's testing a lot of people and making people think differently about things. And, it's a moving organism that is figuring itself out.
And if people want to see the film Blowin Up, which I highly recommend they do, where can they do that?
They can see Blowin Up this week in the theaters at Quad Cinema in Manhattan. It's playing 5 times a day until Thursday. And then on Friday, it's going to be in LA at the Laemmle Music Hall in Beverly Hills. And it'll be playing there for a whole week from April 12th to the 18th.
Stephanie, thank you so much for coming on the show to talk about this important issue and this really beautiful film. Congratulations.
Thank you so much for having me.